that'll take over next December. There's been enormous progress in Afghanistan in exactly the right direction, in spite of what John Edwards said 2.5 years ago. He just got it wrong. The fact is, as we go forward in Afghanistan, we will pursue Osama bin Laden and the terrorists as long as necessary. We're standing up Afghan security forces so they can take on responsibility for their own security. We'll keep U.S. forces there. We have about 16,000 there today, as long as necessary, to assist the Afghans in terms of dealing with their security situation. But they're making significant progress. We've got President Karzai is in power. They have done wonders, writing their own constitution for the first time ever. Schools are open, young girls are going to school, women are going to vote, women are even eligible to run for office. This is major, major progress. There will be democracy in Afghanistan. Make no doubt about it. Freedom is the best antidote to terror.
Senator Edwards, you have 90 seconds to respond.
Someone did get it wrong, but it wasn't John Kerry and John Edwards. They got it wrong. When we had Osama bin Laden cornered, they left the job to the Afghan warlords. They then diverted their attention from the very people who attacked us, who were at the center of the war on terror, and Osama bin Laden is still at large. Now, I want to go back to something the Vice President said just a minute ago, because these distortions are continuing. He said that, made mention of this global test. What John Kerry said, and it's just as clear as day to anybody who was listening, he said, we will find terrorists where they are and kill them before they ever do harm to the American people first. We will keep this country safe. He defended this country as a young man. He will defend this country as President of the United States. He also said very clearly that he will never give any country veto power over the security of the United States of America. Now, I know the Vice President would like to pretend that wasn't said, and the President would too, but the reality is it was said. Here's what's actually happened in Afghanistan, regardless of this rosy scenario that they paint on Afghanistan, just like they do Iraq. What's actually happened is they're now providing 75% of the world's opium. Not only are they providing 75% of the world's opium, large parts of the country are under the control of drug lords and warlords. Big parts of the country are still insecure. And the reality is the part of Afghanistan, eastern Afghanistan, where Osama bin Laden is one of the hardest places to control and the most insecure.
Mr. Vice President, 30 seconds.
20 years ago, we had a similar situation in El Salvador. We had guerrilla insurgency controlled roughly a third of the country, 75,000 people dead, and we held free elections. I was there as an observer on behalf of the Congress. The human drive for freedom, the determination of these people to vote was unbelievable. And as the terrorists would come in and shoot up polling places, as soon as they left, the voters would come back and get in line and would not be denied the right to vote. And today, El Salvador is a whale of a lot better because we held free elections. The power of that concept is enormous. And it will apply in Afghanistan, and it will apply as well in Iraq.
And the Vice President just said that we should focus on state sponsors of terrorism. Iran has moved forward with its nuclear weapons program. They're more dangerous today than they were 4 years ago. North Korea has moved forward with their nuclear weapons program, gone from 1 to 2 nuclear weapons to 6 to 8 nuclear weapons. This Vice President has been an advocate for over a decade for lifting sanctions against Iran, the largest state sponsor of terrorism on the planet. It's a mistake. We should not only not lift them, we should strengthen those sanctions.
New question to you, Senator Edwards, but I don't want to let go of the global test question first, because I want people to understand exactly what it is, as you said, that Senator Kerry did say.
Yes, ma'am.
He said you've got to do, good. He was asked about preemptive action at the last debate. He said you've got to do it in a way that passes the test, that passes the global test, where your countrymen, your people understand fully why you're doing what you're doing, and can prove to the world that you did it for legitimate reasons. What is a global test if it's not a global veto?
Well, let me say first, he said in the same segment, I don't remember precisely where it was connected with what you just read, but he said, point blank, we will never give anyone a veto over the security of the United States of America. What he's saying is, we're going to go back to the proud tradition of the United States of America and presidents of the United States of America for the last 50 to 75 years. First, we're going to actually tell the American people the truth. We're going to tell them the truth about what's happening. We're not going to suggest to them that things are going well in Iraq or any place else, when in fact they're not. We're going to make sure that the American people know the truth about why we're using force and what the explanation for it is. And it's not just the American people. we're also going to make sure that we tell the world the truth. Because the reality is, for America to lead, for America to do what it's done for 50 years before this president and vice president came into office, it is critical that we be credible. It is critical that they believe that when America takes action, they can trust what we're doing, what we say at the United Nations, what we say in direct conversations with leaders of other countries. They need to know that the credibility of the United States is always good, because they will not follow us without that. And unfortunately, we're seeing the consequences of that right now. It's one of the reasons that we're having so much difficulty getting others involved in the effort in Iraq. You know, we've taken 90% of the coalition casualties. American taxpayers have borne 90% of the cost of the effort in Iraq. And we see the result of there not being a coalition. The first Gulf War cost America $5 billion. We're at $200 billion and counting. John Kerry will never give control over the security of the United States of America to any other country. We will not outsource our responsibility to keep this country safe.
Mr. Vice President, you have 90 seconds to respond.
Well, when the 90% figure is just dead wrong, when you include the Iraqi security forces that have suffered casualties, as well as the allies, they've taken almost 50% of the casualties in operations in Iraq, which leaves the U.S. with 50%, not 90%. With respect to the cost, it wasn't $200 billion. You probably weren't there to vote for that, but the $120 billion is in fact what has been allocated to Iraq. The rest of it's for Afghanistan and the global war on terror. The allies have stepped forward and agreed to reduce and forgive Iraqi debt to the tune of nearly $80 billion by one estimate. That plus $14 billion they promised in terms of direct aid puts the overall allied contribution financially at about $95 billion. Not to the $120 billion we've got, but better than 40%. So your facts are just wrong, Senator. You also have a situation where you talk about credibility. It's awfully hard to convey a sense of credibility to allies when you voted for the war and then you declared wrong war, wrong place, wrong time. You voted for the war and then you voted against supporting the troops when they needed the equipment, the fuel, the spare parts, and the ammunition and the body armor. You're not credible on Iraq because of the enormous inconsistencies that John Kerry and you have cited time after time after time during the course of the campaign. Whatever the political pressures the moment requires, that's where you're at. But you've not been consistent, and there's no indication at all that John Kerry has a conviction to successfully carry through on the war on terror.
Senator Edwards, you have 30 seconds.
What the Vice President has just said is just a complete distortion. The American people saw John Kerry on Thursday night. They don't need the Vice President or the President to tell them what they saw. They saw a man who was strong, who had conviction, who is resolute, who made it very clear that he will do everything that has to be done to find terrorists, to keep the American people safe. He laid out his plan for success in Iraq, made it clear that we were committed to success in Iraq. We have to be, because we have troops on the ground there and because they've created a haven for terrorists.
Mr. Vice President, you have 30 seconds.
Your rhetoric, Senator, would be a lot more credible if there was a record to back it up. There isn't. And you cannot use talk tough during the course of a 90-minute debate in a presidential campaign to obscure 30-year record in the United States Senate and prior to that by John Kerry, who has consistently